Today's episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron is brought to you in part by Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle is a web creation service designed specifically for artists and musicians. Not only is it a great way to make a good-looking and functional website, it's also a great way to start making an income off your music, because all of your sales, from your tracks to tickets to your shows to your sample packs, are 100% commission-free. If you're ready to get started with your website, you can use my link down in the description to get a free 30-day trial and save 15%. Howdy doody, buckaroonies. Like most of you, when I head up here to the studio to get to work, I find myself spending way too much time on the internet instead of actually getting anything done. And the other day, I was on the music production subreddit, and I saw a post that just sort of caught my eye, and it was titled, "I Suck, and It's Making Me Really Depressed." The post says, "My skill level has completely sucked the joy out of it. I'm still beginner level after 4.5 years. My tracks suck really hard, and I don't know what to do, man. I'm stuck and can't improve. What can I do? Just give up? I tried quitting, but I just feel depressed that I'm not making any music, and when I make music, I'm depressed because I suck." Well, Administrative Bat 486, on the off chance that you see this video, this one's for you. Before I dropped out of music college, I had a conversation with one of my professors about a very similar feeling and experience I was going through, and he told me something that has stuck with me ever since, that completely changed my outlook on creativity and doing the whole independent artist thing. I feel like I get this question about what to do when creating just doesn't hit the same anymore, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And despite answering this at least a dozen times a month or so, I feel like a lot of the reasons people feel this way fall into the same key sort of categories. And today I wanted to explore each of those in this video, just to provide some thoughts, not necessarily answers, but something kind of close to that, hopefully. Let's see if any of these sound familiar. I'm not very good at it. I will never be successful. I can't make enough money. My art is too weird. Or I'm just not inspired anymore. Whether we want to admit it or not, I think we've all felt these same things on at least some level before, myself very much included. Especially after I transitioned from making music for fun to getting into the professional side of the music industry, it became pretty obvious that it was a job and no longer just a hobby, and that really sucked a lot of just the pure joy out of the process. But just because we're not comparing to whatever imaginary metric we've needlessly thrown up on some kind of pedestal that week, it doesn't mean that everything is all over. I'm not very good at it. This has gotta be the top reason that people give up on creating. And while I understand to an extent where people are coming from in saying this, I think the cold hard truth here that people need to hear is just that good is very much a relative term. If you listen to some 80s garage punk recorded at a home studio on an 8-track, and then compare that to Metallica's Black album recorded in a bazillion-dollar top-end studio with a whole group of people on the production payroll, the truth is that both are equally effective pieces of music. I truly believe that this form of reasoning applies to any kind of art. If you compare something like, I don't know, Paranormal Activity to The Avengers, or Jackson Pollock to Chuck Close, the truth is just that there is no actual definable, tangible definition of good art. One thing I often hear people share is the thought that a good idea outshines bad production or quality. But as I've gotten older, honestly, I'm not really entirely convinced that bad quality actually exists in any real form. Instead, I think as long as you're able to deliver the idea with conviction, everything else is secondary. So I think the simplest piece of advice I can give for someone in this situation is that you need to stop working like a creator and start creating like an artist. I will never be successful. This is one of those really fun feelings, isn't it? The truth to this one, I think, is a little bit harder to unpack, but the reality is that it is exceptionally rare to make a full-time living solely off of your art these days. And most of the time, anyone who tells you otherwise is probably just trying to sell you something. With how piss-poor streaming payouts are, the insane noise floor of the number of visual artists on social media, and the recent shift to short-form media demanding trend-friendly content that often falls under a somewhat formulaic banner, it's just harder than ever to make a living solely as a creator. Success is truly one of the hardest things to define because it's always going to be relative. Now, sure, success might be defined as topping the Billboard charts or selling out your first gallery or having your premiere go on to rake in the awards at all the independent film festivals. But is success by way of being fulfilled by creating art that you feel like matters any less real? I think the thing that brings the truest form of fulfillment and feels the most like true success is when you get to be so absorbed in the process and get excited about the content you're making or the projects you're working on or the music you're writing. Everything else is just the icing on the cake. I think the most real form of success comes from creating something you believe in, and if that happens to resonate with other people, no matter how relatively few that may be in comparison to those top 0.00001% of creators, that's what you have to be in it for. Now, while we'd all love to sit here holding hands talking about how it's just about the vibes, man, the reality is we have to pay bills, and I can't pay my bills on good feelings. So that leads me nicely into my next point. I can't or won't make enough money. Boy, oh boy, friend, if you got into creative work for the money, do I have some news for you. There's actually a good amount of it out there, if you're smart about the way you work. There's a really well-known theory from Kevin Kelly that says you only need 1,000 true fans. While 1 million fans is great, if they're all just casual fans, then you're not really going to have anything that's sustainable. Meanwhile, if you can maintain a base of 1,000 fans that are absolutely ride or die for you, that's all that you really need. Modern creativity is in a particularly weird place anymore. Whether you're a baker or a musician or a photographer or whatever, the sort of unspoken rule of playing the game these days is that you have to also be a content creator. And I think that that's okay, because to me, I feel like we're in the early phases of this sort of paradigm shift for what it means to be a modern creative. There are some of us who want to live our life out on the road, playing festival after festival to tons of adoring fans. And there are some of us who want to live in our New York art studio, getting our next gallery-ready body of work going. And there are tons of other people who want to do tons of other things. But I think the truth is that this ridiculously myopic approach to what you're after as monetary and creative success is the first thing that's going to choke you out as a creative. One of the things I remember from my studio recording instructor in college was that he said the best producer to be is the one who can take the most clients. If you want to be a full-time music producer, but you're only willing to produce extreme black metal albums or whatever, you're drastically limiting your income and likely going to burn out before you can even really take off. Modern creativity is all about learning to play these sorts of games, and if you're willing to do that, you can easily turn your work into a business. Taking your ability to write great music or make great videos or create awesome art can easily be monetized in a ton of different ways as long as you're willing to simply set your ego aside and put in the work. If you're a videographer, you could shoot videos for others. If you're a music producer, you could help produce music for an upcoming artist. If you're a great artist, you could design some shirts for a YouTuber or your favorite band, and so on and so on. If you want to survive in the creative business, you have to build a business. If you can put your hands into enough pots, you can build that reinforced foundation it takes to survive in the creative industry. Now, certainly there are going to be people who are going to sit there flinging shit at you for not being really successful or doing it the right way or whatever. But the truth about these people that I think you need to understand is that they're the ones busy sitting in the comments bitching instead of getting out and actually doing anything. My art is too weird. This is one of my favorites to answer because of how ridiculously hard it is to answer, because of how ridiculously nebulous all of this stuff really is. I love artists like Triphonic or Soundgarden, but I also equally love artists like Ben Frost or Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum. I love the movie 13 Hours, but I also really loved the YouTube series Petscop. Are any of these things too weird? No, because weird is always going to be defined by the audience. I'm sure any of you can relate to the idea that sometimes our favorite bands put out songs that we just don't like. Sometimes there's one single that just sounds like trash, or the album that seems to be a sore spot in an otherwise spotless discography, or that weird phase they went through that ruined the whole thing for you. But some people ate that up and thought it was the best thing that they'd ever created. No matter how obscure or strange your art might be, there's always going to be someone out there who's going to like it or at least appreciate it. Now, of course, if you're after just pure monetary success as maybe a graphic designer or something, it's probably not going to be the best use of your time to design a bunch of weird, obscure artwork things, and it might be more worthwhile to work as a corporate logo designer or something along those lines. But if your goal is to create art or things that you find interesting, you're never going to be able to do that by compromising on your creative vision. It's worth mentioning, though, that weird art doesn't mean it can't be something that's successful. If anything, it's what can actually help you to stand out from the crowd by being one to go against the grain. However, it's worth remembering that the size of that crowd is heavily going to depend on the subgenre of work that we're talking about. I think one of my favorite examples of weird but works has to be Bjork. The first time I ever heard the song Army of Me, I thought it sounded like shit. But after listening again and again and again, it started to become more and more interesting. Eventually, the whole world of Bjork grew on me, and I found myself digging through her entire discography trying to understand what the f*** was happening. And I think any fan of Bjork will tell you the same thing. You just have to go with it, and the rest will emerge eventually. Some of the most interesting and iconic works in all of artistic history were made so profound by their willingness to say, "F*** this shit," and do something different. Now, while you personally are statistically not very likely to change all of art forever, it's worth asking yourself if you're ever going to be able to make something that makes you happy if you're not willing to create the thing that you feel needs to exist in the first place. I'm just not inspired anymore. This has got to be the toughest egg to crack by far because inspiration is so incredibly fickle. I think the plain and simple truth about inspiration is that it's 50% myth and 50% unreliable. If you're just waiting around to feel inspired before you work, you are very, very rarely going to actually get anything done. There's a great quote from Stephen King in his book On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft that says, "If you want to be a writer, write 5,000 words a day." You're a writer. If your goal is to be a creator of any kind, then all you have to do is get out there and start creating something. It's not all going to be perfect, it's not all ever going to see the light of day, but if you're not willing to fail in the process, then you're never going to get anywhere. Failure is such an important part of growth in creative work. If you learn to think of failure as a form of experimentation, you're free to grow from it and take the experience to your next idea. And eventually, it just gets harder and harder to repeat the same failures. Of course, dedication is also an exceptionally important part of any creative craft. You can't create if you don't show up every day and put the work in. As Ron Swanson once said,
"Never half-ass two things. Whole-ass one thing."
George R.R. Martin once asked Stephen King, "How the f*** do you write so many books so fast?" And Stephen King simply replied that he writes 6 pages every day and makes them as good as he can. By simply being willing to show up and put in the work every day, Stephen King is able to maintain a creative output that would make anyone insanely jealous. And by being willing to slog through the low points and all the junk, he's able to work on not only maintaining his output, but improving his craft and his ability to put in the right effort. Eventually, it just gets harder to make 6 bad pages. This isn't to confuse some form of brutalist productivity with the enjoyment of the process, though. You have to learn to find a balance between the two if you ever want to really feel fulfilled as a creator. So, all those years ago, back in music college, I walked up to my professor, insanely frustrated, and I just straight up asked him, "What am I going to do with my life if I'm never going to be a professional guitar player? It's the only thing I've wanted. It's what I've been working for all these years, and I don't know that it's going to work out. So what am I supposed to do with my life?" And he paused for a minute, and he looked at me, and then he said, "The only thing you have to do is die." And that was actually weirdly helpful And maybe it'll be helpful for you too to put all this in perspective, because someday, inevitably and absolutely, who knows when, it's over. Period. The end. No do-overs. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. So if you want to be a musician, go make music. If you want to be an artist, go paint something. If you want to be a writer, then get the fuck off this video and go write something. And if you make something awesome, I fully expect you to come here and report back. So that was a spicy one, and that's it. If you enjoyed this video, I make videos like this, and they come out on the internet when I am done making them. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And of course, as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.